Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big, warm, granite state welcome to the senator from the beautiful state of Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to introduce my wife, Kelly, and my son, Robert, who are here. So I get to go to a lot of political barbecues, all right? Too many barbecues. I'm stretching out my suit, I believe. But I was at a barbecue a couple weeks ago in Paducah, Kentucky. The guy in front of me's got 2 plates of food. And I'm like, you're not going to live very long eating like that. He said, well, my granddad lived to be 105. I said, well, you're not going to live very long. He said, you're not going to live very long eating like that. He said, my granddad lived to be 105. And I said, well, how'd that happen? He said, by minding his own business. Sometimes I think I wish my government were leaving me alone a little more and minding its own business. In fact, I often say, I want a government so small, you can barely see it. I want a government that only does what it's supposed to do according to the Constitution. There's something called enumerated powers. We've forgotten about that. We've let government get literally out of control. We have a government now that borrows $1 million every minute. Now, most of us would say we're fiscal conservatives. Everybody here probably says we're for a balanced budget amendment. In fact, when the balanced budget amendment comes before the Senate, every Republican votes for it. The only problem is that when you actually put a balanced budget forward, only about 1/3 of the Republicans vote for it. And there is a dirty little secret. I'm going to let you in on a secret that the media won't tell you. The problem with spending is really the responsibility of both parties. In fact, this is something you won't hear from any of the other candidates, but it is absolutely the truth. The loudest voices for increasing federal spending right now are Republican. And you say, oh, that can't be true. Well, it is true because they're saying we've got to have more military spending. But the only way they can get it is they have to give the Democrats more domestic, more welfare spending. So it's what I call the unholy alliance. Both sides are wanting to raise spending. In fact, that's what happened. I kept them up till 3 in the morning. They were not very happy with me. I was lecturing them till 3 in the morning that raising the debt ceiling is an absolutely bad idea if you're also raising spending at the same time. If I'm president, we'll balance the budget. We will not have any more of this nonsense. I've introduced 3 budgets that balance, all like the balanced budget amendment, within 5 years. How many votes do we get? About 1/3 of the Republicans. This is once again the problem. Republican leadership actually went along with the president to raise the debt ceiling. How much did we raise the debt ceiling? An unspecified amount. We didn't raise it $500 billion. We didn't raise it $1 trillion. We raised it an unspecified amount. And we raised the budget caps. This is the second time we did this. In fact, everybody in Washington and many on the right are saying, oh, we can't have the sequester. The sequester's killing us. We won't have any national defense with a sequester. Crazy. Do you know how much money we spend on national defense? And I believe in a strong national defense. Kelly's dad spent 20 years in the Air Force. Her brother was in the Air Force Academy. We have 3 nephews in the Navy. My dad was in the Air Force. We believe in a strong military. We believe in a strong national defense. But you're not stronger from bankruptcy court. The biggest threat to our national security right now is our debt. So for the candidates who come before you, let's just say Rubio, and say they want $1 trillion more in military spending, ask them where they're going to get it. See, we had a vote on the budget. Marco put forward an amendment to increase military spending by $200 billion. And Cruz seconded him. They both voted for this amendment. I say, where's the money going to come from? And are we safer if we're $200 billion more in debt? And they said, well, we're strong. We're for a strong defense, and we're just going to vote for more money. So they did, $200 billion. I introduced a competing amendment that would have increased the money they wanted for the military, but would have offset it with cuts. You know how many people voted for mine? About 6. Nobody wants to make the cuts. Everybody's for spending, but what I'm telling you is sometimes there's no difference between right and left. They're just wanting to spend it on different items. And the problem is the unholy alliance is they both come together and they spend your money. The sequester was a slowdown in the rate of growth of spending. It was not a cut. They say, oh, it's draconian cuts and we're hollowing out the military. It was not a cut. Over a 10-year period, the sequester was a gradual reduction in the rate of spending. On the news channels, you see this is the chart for spending. Here's the chart for spending with the sequester. They're both increasing. But we couldn't even handle that. In the last 4 years, we've given up because Republican leadership has worked with the Democrats to get rid of the sequester. I ran for office because I was unhappy. I was part of the Tea Party movement. I was unhappy that Republicans were doubling the debt and expanding government programs. Under the last Republican administration, the debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. Now we're going to go from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. We're going to add more debt under President Obama than all the presidents combined. But what I'm telling you is, if you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. If you elect a president or nominate a Republican who says we're going to be the adults and we're going to preside over government and there's never going to be any hiccups and we're not going to challenge the president on anything because we always have to keep the government open, the question you have to ask is, keeping something open that borrows $1 million a minute, is that really what you want, or would you rather have someone who uses the leverage, uses the power of the purse and says, enough's enough, let's let it all come to a screeching halt, and let's start up only what we need, and let's balance the budget at the same time. Now, you may have heard a few of the candidates who say, I'm not going to talk to Russia. I think that's what Carly Fiorina says. She's not going to talk to Putin. I think our previous speaker up here, Governor Kasich, says he's going to punch him in the nose. Chris Christie says he's going to shoot down Russia's planes. I think we ought to think fully what kind of temperament we want in a commander-in-chief. Do you really want a commander-in-chief who is eager to shoot down Russians' planes, punch Russia in the nose, and not talk to Putin? Think back who we think were great presidents. Was Ronald Reagan a great president? I think so. My family supported him. When I was 13, I went to the National Convention in Kansas City, the closest nominating process in the last 100 years, because we were Reagan Republicans. Reagan talked to Gorbachev. In fact, one of my favorite stories about Reagan talking to Gorbachev is he told his advisors he was going to tell them this story. And they all said, don't do it, don't do it. There'll be an international incident. Of course, Reagan did what he wanted to do. So he told Gorbachev this story. It seems there was an accountant, and this accountant had wanted a car. In the Soviet Union, it was hard to get a car. There was only one dealer. It was owned by the government, socialism. So he saved money for a year or two, and he finally had enough money, and he went into the state-run car dealership, and he put his money down, and he was so proud, he said, I'd like my car. The surly bureaucrat sneered at him across the table and said, well, that's all well and good. You can come back and get it in a year. And he didn't miss a beat. He said, will that be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? And the snarling bureaucrat said, I just told you it's going to be a year, and you want to know if it's going to be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? He said, yeah, the plumber's coming on that Tuesday. It was a joke that Gorbachev could really get, because if you've ever lived under socialism, it doesn't work. But can you imagine? See, this is what I worry about our country. The majority of New Hampshire Democrats think socialism and Bernie Sanders is just great. How could that happen? Have they not read any history? Have we not learned from the Soviet Union? Have we not learned that socialism is an abysmal failure? We won the Cold War. Why? Because the engine of capitalism defeated the engine of socialism. The engine of socialism is a sputtering wreck. The one thing that is universal about socialism, it doesn't produce things well. It doesn't distribute goods well. But on the other side, on our side, we have a candidate who may or may not be leading in the polls who tells you he's going to fix things. Give him power and he will fix things. He's used to having power. His business model is he goes to the local government, he says, give me land for casinos and I'll build them. Who cares if it takes eminent domain to take that land? But there's another tradition, and I would venture to say that most of you, and I would venture to say that most Republicans in New Hampshire are not part of that tradition. We're part of the tradition that dates all the way back to the plains at Runnymede. When the Magna Carta came forth, the Magna Carta said you cannot have your property taken without due process of law, without a jury of your peers. We were very conscious of that. We were conscious that capitalism is based upon property rights, and property rights should not be trivialized. The Supreme Court's gotten this wrong, the Kelo decision. In fact, one of your New Hampshireites, Justice Souter, didn't quite understand the issue. But they allowed for private property to be taken from one private property owner and given to another. But you know what this has led to? In places where all bad ideas begin and hopefully end, California or Washington, but California, they've been using eminent domain based on Kelo to take property from churches because they don't pay enough in taxes and giving it to a retailer. In fact, some wits here in New Hampshire, a taxpayer group, thought it was funny. They went to Justice Souter's house and they said, we're going to take it through eminent domain and make it into a hotel, if you don't mind. But see, property rights shouldn't be relative. And we should look at a candidate like Trump who says eminent domain's a great thing, Kelo's a perfectly well-decided decision, and by golly, that's the way I make my money. We should think about Vera Koking, who lived in her house for 30 years, and when Trump tried to take her house, she stood up to him. She stood up to him and she beat him in court. But the question is, are we going to stand up to somebody who thinks that power is a good thing, that he's so smart, he's so rich that he must be smart, that if you give him power, he's going to fix things? I think most of us are of an opposite tradition. The Constitution was written, Patrick Henry stated it well, he said the Constitution was written not to restrain you, not to restrain the people, but to restrain the government. See, the history of our country is the history of trying to restrain despotism. It's what happened with the Magna Carta. When the barons came forth, they tried to limit the power of the king. When our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they wanted to significantly limit the power of the presidency. In fact, the power to go to war was given to Congress. Declaration of war is supposed to come from Congress. And I can tell you one thing, if I am president, we will not go to war without a declaration of war. Now, you may have noticed that the powers that be decided they didn't want me in the debate the last time. We object to that. We think it was a dirty, rotten, no good deal. We think the polls indicate we should have been there. We tied for fourth in the last WMUR poll. We've been alone in front of several of the candidates in the Des Moines poll. But for better or worse, I think I provide a unique perspective that is healthy for the party. We may not all agree on every issue, but if we want to grow the party, you need a liberty movement. You need somebody who will go to the south side of Chicago. You need somebody who's talking about criminal justice and how it's been unfair. I've been to Chicago, I've been to Detroit, I've been to Highland Park, I've been to Flint, I've been to Philadelphia. I've been taking a message that the Bill of Rights, that we are the party of the Bill of Rights. That we were the party of emancipation, we are the party of civil rights, we are the party that can be bigger and can be better and can be bolder. I don't think we have to give up an iota of what we believe in. We don't have to dilute any of our principles, but we need to take our principles to new places. Now, there's some people who come before you and they say, oh, we don't need to do that. We just have never been sufficiently conservative, and some of that's true. And all we got to do is rally the base. I disagree completely. I think you have to do both. You got to rally the base. We've got to all be enthused about the nominee, and then you need somebody that then says, I'm going to go get new audiences. I'm going to go after and see if the African-American audience will listen to us. The Hispanic audience will listen to us. The younger voter will listen to us. I can tell you that we are going crazy on college campuses with kids coming by the thousands to our rallies because I'm willing to say the government went too far in collecting your phone records. I'm willing to say that the government shouldn't do that. John Adams said that the spark that led to the War for Independence was the idea that James Otis was fighting against, which were writs of assistance, generalized warrants, where the British soldiers wrote the warrant but didn't have anybody's name on it. This was a big deal. This was a much bigger deal than the Second Amendment. Nobody could even imagine the government would take your guns in those days. But they could imagine British soldiers coming in their house to see if they'd paid their taxes with a generalized warrant. It was a big deal. That's why they wrote the Fourth Amendment. And people say, well, how are we going to catch terrorists? I say what we do is we target terrorists. We go after them and we look at all their records. I don't care how deep we look at the haystack. But here's the difference between me and the other candidates. Rubio, Bush, all of the others, Christie, they all want more surveillance of you. If you come to me and I'm the judge and you say this Boston Sinarov, one of the brothers that did the marathon bomb, you say, well, the Russians have tipped us off. And he went back to Chechnya, and we see on his social posting that he's for violence. You ask me, can we have a warrant to look at his computer? Absolutely. Can we look at his phone calls? Absolutely. Can we look at the people he called? Absolutely. Can we keep digging until we find everybody he's connected with? Absolutely. Name the person, give me suspicion, not proof, suspicion, probable cause, and a judge signs it. I'm all for that. But if you ask me, can we look at everybody's records in Boston or everybody's records in New Hampshire to try to find that, I'm thinking maybe we're giving up something that is so fundamentally part of who we are that we're giving up something about America in the process of trying to defend America. Kelly and I have participated in a charity where we build houses for wounded veterans. It's one of probably the most rewarding things I've done in office. In Washington, you get frustrated a lot, but we've gone home and we can actually see the house. We've seen our neighbors come together. We've seen neighbors coming to a fundraiser and saying, thank you for inviting me. I would like to give more. Call me again. You don't often go to a fundraiser where people are thanking you for taking their money. But we can see the houses that these people live in, and we can see the horror of the injuries. We have a young man who was very brave and saved many other lives. He lost both legs and an arm, and he lives in a neighboring town to us. And we helped to build him a house. But when you ask him, what were you fighting for? What did you go to war for? He says, I took an oath. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. I took an oath to defend the Bill of Rights. And what I'm asking you is, wouldn't it be sad? Wouldn't we all be sad if he came home and we gave up on the Bill of Rights while he was gone fighting for it? We shouldn't do that. In the debate before last, when they did let me come, there was a good debate over foreign policy. And it was whether or not regime change is a good idea. And I think this is a healthy debate, not only for our party, but for the country. We have to ask ourselves what things have worked and what things have not worked. We have to ask ourselves, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush and John McCain and Lindsey Graham all said, let's topple Gaddafi in Libya. We're going to somehow be better if we topple Gaddafi. What happened? We toppled Gaddafi and we got chaos. And we got the rise of radical Islam. A third of Libya now pledges allegiance to ISIS. They killed our ambassador. I'm having trouble understanding what the good part of that is. And the question is, has it ever been a good idea? Because we now have another situation. We have the same situation in Syria. There are people in our party, let's just call them John McCain, who want to bomb both sides of the Syrian war. They want to bomb ISIS and Assad. But ask yourself, if you get rid of Assad, who's going to replace him? Thomas Jefferson? I think you're much more likely to have ISIS in charge. I have met hundreds, if not thousands, of Syrian Christians who live in our country now that have been here for a long time. I went to medical school with one. But the thing is you ask them, who would you prefer? Now, they're not jumping up and down saying they love Assad or that he is Thomas Jefferson, but they'll say, without question, we want Assad versus ISIS. And so we have to be very careful about saying, oh, we know what's best. We're going to topple Assad. And I've been saying this for 3 years now. When the Foreign Relations Committee voted to send arms in there, I raised my hand and I said, the great irony is we'll be back in a year or two fighting against our own weapons. Because we've been funding the Islamic rebels. In fact, people explicitly will tell you, we need to fund the allies of Al-Qaeda. And I'm like, really? I thought that's who attacked us on 9/11. We're going to fund the people who attacked us? Oh, yes, because they're not quite as bad as ISIS. And I'm like, I think we're talking about gradations of evil here. So it is a good debate to have because we do disagree on this. And I think it makes for a spirited debate, and you have to decide. Do you think a regime change is a good idea? Or maybe we ought to think more along the lines of Reagan. People say, oh, well, Reagan did it all the time. No, Reagan actually had a little bit more nuanced foreign policy. Reagan spoke with Gorbachev. He never cut off communications with Russia. He never said he was going to punch Russia in the nose. He never said we're no longer going to talk to Gorbachev. He actually negotiated with the Soviet Union. But he also believed in peace through strength, and he also negotiated from a position of strength. I think that's what we need. I think we need a sensible foreign policy. I think we need to balance our budget, that there can be no sacred cow for right or left, that we have to put our books in order, and I'll do it. I will from day one say we have to balance our budget. No exceptions. I'd like to close with a story about criminal justice, because I think the thing that we have to understand is how are we going to get our message to resonate, and how can we make our message resonate with people who don't really understand or have never been part of the Republican Party. I think the way we make it resonate is we have to understand what it's like to be poor, African American, and living in our big cities. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old black kid from the Bronx. He was arrested and accused of a crime. Actually accused of a crime by somebody who didn't even live in this country, wasn't here legally, and never again showed up to testify. He was kept for 3 years in prison, though, with no trial. He was beaten. Who knows what else happened to him? He was kept in solitary confinement for 2 years. He's a 16-year-old kid. For 2 years in solitary confinement. He's trying to commit suicide multiple times. He never has a trial. They finally let him go after 3 years. Imagine, if you're his family, what you think about justice. He died. He finally did commit suicide 6 months ago. Imagine if you went to high school with him in the Bronx, or you're his parents or his parents' friends. I think you can start to imagine that there's this great anger about feeling that there's not justice in our country. If you look at the war on drugs and you say, who's using drugs? Well, guess what? White kids and black kids are using drugs at about the same rate. But white kids are about 80% of the public. But if you look at the jail is 3 out of 4 black people. They're poor. They live in a neighborhood that has more crime. And I'm not saying it's racism. It's just there's more crime, and so the police are there all the time, but it adds up. So we have to look at the war on drugs because we've decimated a whole generation of young African American males. You know where some of these rules came from? Bill Clinton. I'm the only one that could ever challenge the Clintons and say, I'm going to go to the African American community, you know what? I'm going to get votes for Republican like we've never, ever gotten before. And as we take our message around the country, I would say we have to present our message with hope and with optimism. There's a painter by the name of Robert Henry, and he said, as he exhorted young painters, he said, paint like a man coming over the hill singing. And I like that image. I think when we become the party that proclaims our message with the passion of Patrick Henry, but also with the optimism and the hope of a man coming over the hill singing, then we're going to rock and roll to victory. I want to be part of that, and I hope you do too. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And they told me I got carried away and I used up all my time except for one question, so we'll go to this young lady right here.
Thank you. My name is Kelly, and I'm an Iraq veteran. And when I was in Iraq, we put our lives on the line guarding private contractors so that they could make money. Corporations that profit from war spend millions of dollars lobbying on campaigns and legislation. What would you do to limit corporate influence on our politicians who they treat like they're for hire?
I think it's a great question. And the first thing I would say is that anybody that gets money from government in the form of a contract should be limited in what they can do to lobby to get more of our money. And so this is going on nonstop. And I think there is a possibility for campaign finance reform as long as we understand what the compromise has to be. If we say, oh, it's only big business doing this, you're never going to get any legislation. If we admit that it's big business and big unions, and you'll write the rule such that we control both, I think we can pass it. The Supreme Court has ruled that if I'm a group, like say I'm a pro-Second Amendment group and I want to spend money, that's speech, and you can't limit it. So the way I would say that we get around that in order to have some limitations on people purchasing and influencing government is what I would do is say, if a contractor comes and I'm getting $1 billion contract to build tanks or whatever, we need tanks and we got to have armaments, so I'm $1 billion. The person building the tanks would have a contract they signed to get the $1 billion. It would say in the contract, I agree not to lobby and give contributions to legislators. I think you could restrict special interests by contract, voluntary contract, when they do business with government. It's something that I've been trying to get the Democrats interested in, and I think ultimately is the one fix that the Supreme Court would approve because it would be voluntary. You don't have a guarantee or a right to a government contract. And it is a problem because the biggest problem we have is government creates agencies or spends money, and a lot of that money comes back to lobby for more money. In fact, my biggest objection with the Federal Reserve right now is they actually lobby against oversight on themselves. So we created them, they're enormously powerful, and they come to the Senate and to Congress and lobby against us overseeing them. So that really shouldn't happen. I've got a bill to make that illegal also. So I think we should place limits on those who get money from government. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Oh, and we have one announcement from Jennifer. Jennifer wants to make an announcement.
I need my microphone.
Here you go.
Very good, very good. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Senator, I'm going to ask you to stand right here. And I want to introduce everybody to Julie. She is a high school Navy cadet who came here today to meet our candidates and present them with her coin. We're very happy to have you here. She particularly wanted to see Senator Paul. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart. Great. Now, very quickly, before I lose your attention, Senator Paul is going to stay and have a chance to say hi and shake a few hands. It is time for lunch. You know, if you purchased a ticket for the deli lunch, it says it on the back of your credentials, or if you purchased a ticket for the lunch with Governor Bevin, you can go back to registration if you'd like to purchase lunch and you haven't done so yet. There's also the restaurant here, the Shade Grill. We're going to come back right on schedule, so please enjoy your lunch. It's good to see you all here, and we'll be back in about an hour and 15 minutes.
He's going to move way down there. No, I got it. But they're all dead. Awesome. They're all dead.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Senator, I think we're going to head down this way.
It's easier if we turn it around and somebody will do it.
That would be great.
All right.
It's my dose of liberty for the day. Thank you. Thank you for understanding the Fourth Amendment.
Sure.
Sure thing. Next.
Just anywhere.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Right here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Louisville or Kentucky fan?
I have two sons that go to UK, so UK.
So that takes care of that answer.
This young man right here.
One graduate and one there, so.
Thanks a lot, sir.
I think it's gentleman.
Hey, how are you? Thank you very much.
Senator.
Thank you.
This one right behind.
Just a second.
Sorry. Thank you.
Hey, how are you?
I like your
He's been doing yoga for that one.
So this is my friend Randy from South Carolina. How you doing? We got a lot of. So I gotta make sure these pictures come out.
I got one here, sir.
Beautiful town.
It's great to see you.
Appreciate it.
Sorry. It's me again.
He's with the hotel, so.
Oh, that looks good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we get him?
Sure.
Sounds like
I think it's
How about
We can take it.
Right here.
Here you go.
yeah, is this sharp?
Come right.
Thank you. Fran,
That's what I was thinking.
I'll take it.
There you go.
Fran.
Good luck. Thank you.
One, two.
Push it out.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
All right, gotta walk down.
Oh, that one turned out well.
Hi.
Got that back.
I think the main thing we need to do is not spend your inheritance. And that means that we shouldn't stick you with the bill for all the things that we're spending in government now. Right now, every individual in America owes $50,000. So all the kids your age are going to owe $50,000 for all the stuff that they're spending money on now. So I'm advocating that we only spend what comes in. Just like your parents do, whatever your parents make in their paycheck, that's what they get to spend. That's what government ought to do too. Thanks.
Thank you.
There you go.
Can't really see, there's nothing up here. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Senator, what's your reaction to Michael Bloomberg's possible run as an independent? What's your reaction to him?
You know, I think the gun control is not that popular in our country, and so I think it'll be probably splitting some of the Democrat vote if that's one of his key issues to run on gun control. It seems to be what's activated him and inspired him in recent elections has been gun control. So if he splits the Democrat vote, those for gun control, that might be good for Republicans. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
You just heard Senator Rand Paul answering a question about a possible Michael Bloomberg run for president. The New York Times with a breaking news alert earlier today that the former New York mayor, Michael R. Bloomberg, sensing an opening, is exploring plans for an independent presidential bid. Advisors and allies say. We'll continue to follow that story for you. And we'll continue our live coverage here in Nashua, New Hampshire this afternoon after the lunch break. The New Hampshire Republican Party holding a presidential town hall. Still to come, Carly Fiorina and Jim Gilmore as a number of GOP candidates are addressing the group today.